Welcome to the Plugged In Podcast by Sweetwater. I'm your host, Mitch Gallagher. Thanks so much for joining us today. Now, for today's episode of the Plugged In Podcast, we're sitting down with Thomas Barefoot, the founder and, shall we say, engine that drives his namesake company, Barefoot Sound. Thomas is a prime example of the great American success story. He comes from humble beginnings and from a young age began delving into making and repairing instruments, eventually focusing his inventive mind and university studies in physics to launch his innovative line of studio monitors in his garage. From those humble beginnings, Barefoot Sound has become one of the leading lights in innovative monitor design. And we sat down with Thomas to discuss his history, philosophy, and more, including the Footprint 03 monitors, which had just been introduced at the time of this recording. All right. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Plugged In Podcast by Sweetwater. Settle in and let's get started. Thomas, welcome back to Sweetwater.
Thank you.
You've been here. This is your third trip. You were telling me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're a veteran of visiting the place here. And well, man, we're so excited to have Barefoot here at Sweetwater. I mean, the monitors are just fantastic, and you keep expanding the line. And we're going to spend some time talking about the Footprint 03.
Yeah.
But let's talk a little bit about you.
Okay.
You're a physics guy.
I'm a physics PhD dropout. So, yeah.
Well, that's awesome. But what interested me about your story is the way you started, wanting to make your own electric guitar, your own guitar amp, and then sort of working your way through high school.
Yeah. I was, I don't want to overstate it, but we were kind of poor as kids, and I wanted an electric guitar. Didn't really have, the money to buy one. And a friend of mine had an old, one of these department store Les Paul copies that was all broken.
Right.
And the resource I did have was the wood shop in my school. So I decided to, I bought those parts off him for $5. And, of course, this was the time when there was no YouTube videos about how to build a guitar.
Right,
so I had to kind of figure it out. There was Irving Sloane's guitar repair book in the library, and which kind of showed you how to take apart a guitar.
Yeah.
So I sort of reversed engineered that, and
I spent hours digging through that book.
Yeah.
Just poring over all the parts of it or whatever. What a tremendous resource that was.
Show you how to take off the fingerboard. I knew that was the part I couldn't make at that time. So
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's cool. So you progressed from that to repairing and modding guitars for your friends?
Yeah. We lived, when by the time I went to middle school, my mom had the foresight to move us into another poor neighborhood, but it was actually part of a middle school, this very good school district. Mm-hmm. So we were going to, I was going to school with all these middle school kids, and they seemed rich to me. So I was like, okay, well, I could, you want a pedal board? You want me to make you a guitar, modify your guitar? Put a tremolo into it or whatever. I was like, I can do all that. So,
yeah, that's so cool. That's so cool. So do you still play?
I play a little bit. I was lucky enough to realize at a young enough age that I didn't have the gifts that other people had. So I noodle around. I mostly just try to make sounds, So
Sure.
I'm pretty good at making.
Well, that's
sounds.
awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. So you chose to focus your energy then into physics and engineering and inventing, really.
Yeah. So I was lucky enough to get a bunch of scholarships and grants to go to study physics as an undergrad, and then. Spent some time in industry for a little while, and then went back to graduate school and studied physics again there, but realized I was not an academic. So in the middle of my third year in grad school, I kind of dropped out and headed west to, I guess, make my fortune or whatever.
Yeah, there you go.
But and then I started working at Intel, doing kind of R&D there. Started a family, and in the midst of that, so I had been building speakers and things like that all my life, and got involved in the online recording community, just kind of as a creative outlet, because I had this very intense job and not much time, so on the computer anyhow, so I might as well start making beats and that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
and just kind of got involved in the forums and got known as the speaker guy, Barefoot, as my moniker online, and came up with kind of, through a bunch of those conversations, came up with this kind of new concept for a studio monitor. Basically, I was was an affront to me that that people were tracking and mixing on what I felt were just essentially glorified bookshelf speakers. And then, you send it to the mastering engineer who's got the real deal speakers at the end of the process. And that's, they're actually closer to the consumer and, the least dynamic tracks, it seemed to me that was either backwards or everybody should be hearing the same thing throughout the entire process. So
right.
Kind of set about trying to figure out how to, squash a mastering tower down into the size of a near field that could work on a console.
Right.
And I just as Barefoot online, I got people to send me 4,000. This was the original iteration of the MM12. Got people to send me $4,000 deposits to hand build these things in my garage.
Wow.
And and then it kind of spiraled from there.
Right. So kind of the American success story. Started in your garage part-time and about 2006 you went full-time, is that right?
Yeah. I wound up getting myself, because I was so distracted by the speaker job, my very intense Intel job was taking a back seat and got myself fired from Intel. So
you had some motivation to make this speaker thing work.
It was probably a self-fulfilling kind of thing, but I've essentially forced myself into building speakers full time.
Right. Well, in addition to the concept of really bringing the mastering level speaker into the recording studio for both tracking and mixing, you've had a number of other innovations that you've brought to your monitors. And I think the most obvious one in most of the speakers is the dual force woofers. Yeah,
that was part of that, thing of essentially I'm trying to put a bunch of drivers into this small cabinet. And, the first thing is just like, where do you put them?
Right.
And since the low frequencies are essentially omnidirectional, it doesn't really matter where the speakers are because the wavelengths are so much bigger than the drivers in the cabinet that it's an omni source. So it kind of made sense to put them on the sides. Mm-hmm. And then you put them on the sides and then it's like, well, what if I, attach the motors together? That would basically make it so that speakers kind of, there's Newton's third law. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So when the motor pushes on the speaker cone pushes back on the motor. The motor is attached to the cabinet via the basket, the frame of the speaker, and those vibrations go to the cabinet, and that's an undesirable thing. You want all the sound coming out of the moving bits, mm-hmm. and you want none of the sound. You want the boxes should really just be completely inert. But with this dual opposing thing, it's basically you're attaching the motors, and now both speakers move out of the cabinet at the same time in opposite directions. They move into the cabinet, and those forces are all canceled out before they even start.
Yeah.
Turns out I didn't invent that though, because there's a lot of smart people, and eventually went and did a patent search, and it was invented by somebody in 1972 or something.
Sure,
like that.
Right. Credit where credit's due. Right?
Yeah.
But the cool thing is that you can actually, you can feel it if you with a ton of low end coming out of the monitor. You put your hand on the cabinet, and there's no vibration or resonance like you would have with many other speakers.
Yeah, and I felt like that. That's really important too, because the essentially original concept of the MM27 was that it was basically a two-way near field. Mm-hmm. So and then the other drivers, the other mid bass, the subwoofers are all there to just essentially beef out this near field and make it a truly full range speaker. But this thing is sitting up on a console. It's right in your face. All this low frequency energy could potentially be problematic.
Right.
So that needs to, it needs to be very well controlled, and this dual force solution just makes that possible.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And speaking of dual, you have another dual technology in many of your monitors, and that's the dual ring radiator on the high frequency driver as well.
Right. Yeah. So the idea of that is so one of the problems with a tweeter is really any driver is that when the frequencies get higher, the wavelengths get shorter, and when the wavelengths of the sound get to be on the order of the size of the the diaphragm itself, the speaker becomes much more directional. It starts to beam more like a flashlight than radiate like a light bulb. So the ring radiator helps in the sense that you have this phase plug in the middle, and what that helps do is it essentially stops this crosstalk of when you're off axis, you have sound coming from one side of the driver and the other side of the driver, and those things are now different distances away from you. And when the wavelengths are relatively small, that means that there's a phase difference between them, and you can get phase cancellation. And the phase plug in the middle and the just the nature of the ring source itself helps to stop that cancellation from happening. So that's one cool thing about it. And the other thing is a typical dome tweeter has essentially one point of suspension on the outside, and that allows the voice coil to sort of do this hula hoop action inside the magnetic gap, which causes distortion. But with the dual ring radiator, it's pinned in the middle, and so now you have essentially 2 points of suspension, so it's a more linear travel.
Right. Well, obviously the detail is fantastic on the monitor as well. It's quite a feat, in my opinion, that you've managed to balance that tremendous bottom end capability with the detail and the broad sweet spot that you get on the top end because of that technology. Yeah, it really works out well. Another one that of course is very important in the studio is being able to reference on different monitors, and you've come up with a solution for that using just a single box.
Yeah, and that kind of came about, I guess, out of just, I don't know, jealousy or something, or I don't know. But it was, so the first generation of the MM27, got to be, kind of a hit. And I would see all these, pictures, or I'd walk into studios and I would see those, white cone speakers parked up alongside my beautiful MM27s, and it just seemed like an affront to me that should. When I developed the second generation of the 27s, I decided, well, those other speakers cannot do what my speakers can do, but my speakers can do what those can do. So it's essentially an emulation, a modeling of the white cone speakers and the little mix cubes. And then we also do sort of a hi-fi mode, which is really just, the kind of more blooming of the, we kind of actually emulate a ported kind of a boomy, not boomy, but more bloomy kind of low end of a ported speaker, little, sparkle on the top, the kind of thing that you go, hear in a hi-fi.
Yeah, sure. A little bit more scoop maybe in the mid-range and not quite as accurate as the flat position.
Yeah, the flat is what I consider to be optimal. So.
Right. So that's called DMEM technology.
Yeah, and it's it's kind of a cute, silly acronym, but it's just multi-emphasis monitor emulation is one of those kind of backronym kind of things. I don't know what to name things, so we just got to make something up.
It's catchy and you always remember it, right? And so then you just choose one of those 4 settings and you have instant ability to reference on a couple of different monitors. So
and we have people who love it. We have some customers say, I never touched that thing, but either way, it's
that's all good. It's there. Yeah, fantastic. Well, you mentioned ports, and most of your monitors are seal boxes.
Right.
But that brings us to the Footprint series. You came out with the Footprint 01, then the 02,
right,
and now we're talking about the Footprint 03. And these are a little bit scaled down, I would say, from some of the other monitors. Tell us where the Footprint series came from. Yeah,
I mean, so basically, maybe it seems counterintuitive, but you start out as a small company in your garage. It's actually easier to make high-end products because you're building a small number of them, and you're not so worried about costs and all that sort of thing. So it takes more resources to make lower priced products. So we started out in this very kind of high end rarefied price space,
right?
And but that was never my I don't want to compromise. I want to build the best speakers I can possibly build, and so that does entail a sort of a certain minimum threshold of where we can be, but I do want these things to people to have these things and to use them, and for them to be used as broadly as possible, because I guess I feel like I maybe have something to contribute for people. And so the Footprint series was it was an effort to try to make at least for us what we consider more affordable line and with as few compromises as possible.
Right. I've had the 01s in my studio for quite a while, and man, I know they're a little bit lower priced, but I don't think they're compromised there. I mean, there's bottom end. I mean, you still have the dual force woofers in the 01s and the 02s, and that high frequency driver that just gives you so much detail. So they still perform fantastically. And the one that I've been listening to lately, I've had them for about a month, I'd say, is the 03s. And this is the latest that you've come out with. We've got the Cutaway here, which is just fantastic. But this is the one that brings us, I'm going to come way back around to where I started this with the port, because this is your first ported monitor. Is that right?
It's the first Barefoot ported. Yeah, I've designed ported speakers, in the past, but this is the first Barefoot. And again, I'm not ideological about any design. I'm trying to build, to build the best speaker I can. Mm-hmm. And I try to look at it kind of holistically, so I've got, I'm trying to work within this price point and a form factor. So I'm would I want to build them as sealed box speakers? Yeah, I think that there's advantages to that. But the thing is that there's a spectrum of alignments that you can, you can make a speaker that's, you sort of optimize it to be small and go really low, but then you sacrifice transient response. You can make it a bigger port, and get better transient responses that kind of can approach what a sealed box can do, and that's what we've done with the footprint.
Yeah, it's deceiving from the outside because you see the port in the side of the monitor and you think, well, there's just a hole in the side of the monitor, but there's more going on. That port actually extends almost all the way across the cabinet, doesn't it? What does that do, having that long length of the port there?
Well, so if you think of a speaker in a box, it's essentially like it's like a high pass filter. Right, and a speaker in a sealed box is like a second order high pass filter, so drops off at 12 dB per octave, mm-hmm. and but a speaker in a ported box is like a fourth order high pass filter, and the reason that is because what you're doing is you're essentially coupling the speaker to a Helmholtz resonator, so the box itself and the port are a resonator. Okay. And you tune that resonator down lower than the speaker actually wants to go. So as it's starting to roll off in the low frequencies, see if I'm going in the right direction here for the camera. So it starts rolling off in the low frequencies. Now there's this resonator with this peak down there. And as it's rolling off, it starts exciting the upper tail of that peak. And then, so the whole system response, can be extended out. And so as the speaker in the box starts dropping off more, you start climbing up that resonant peak. And then so the total system output can stay flat. And once you get down and you get past the resonant peak, then it drops off much faster. Mm-hmm. So you're able to extend the speaker down by coupling it to this resonator down further than it wants to go. And that's cool. The downside of that is that a resonator stores and releases energy in time. And so it essentially smears out the bass response mm-hmm. in time. So it's worse transient response.
Okay.
But you have some play in that with the size of the box and the length of the port, the diameter of the port. You can make it better, sure. Or you can make it worse.
Right.
And in this case, we're trying to lean in that direction with a and it actually seems counterintuitive, but the bigger you make the port, and that's also another thing, you want the port to be relatively big diameters because you don't want that noise. Mm-hmm. You don't want the air velocity to get up to too high of a speed. You want it to stay well below the actual speed of sound. But you make the diameter bigger, and you actually have to make the port longer.
Okay.
To chain the same resonant frequency.
Right. There's a lot
if I got into too many details.
No, that's fascinating. There's a lot of factors that go in. It's not just putting a hole in the side of the box.
Right. Yeah.
There's a lot that goes in there. Now these have the MEME technology in them as well, but there's other DSP going on inside as well?
All of our speakers are DSP based. Yeah.
Okay.
So there's a lot of things. It's not just MEME. It's a lot of the things that we're doing in the crossover and also in the bass response that would be extremely difficult to do in the analog domain. So
right. What's cool about it, though, is it's kind of the way that I think of tuning in a studio, a control room, is you get it as good as you can acoustically, and then you use the DSP to just tweak that last little bit and get the maximum performance out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of take this approach like where I'm trying to make the mechanical parts, which, if you design electronics, the levels of distortion and badness, are so much lower than what are involved with the actual moving mechanical parts like a speaker. So I'm trying to make the moving mechanical parts as linear and sort of low Q, well damped as possible. And then if I need to raise the damping, trying not to tell too much about what I'm doing, but so
Don't give anything away.
I do that in the electronic digital realm, and where it's much better controlled.
Sure.
So I try to keep things as controlled as possible in the acoustic mechanical domain, and do all the heavy lifting in the digital domain.
Right. Yeah, it's a very cool combination. Obviously it works because the monitors sound fantastic, and the bottom end is the first time I plugged them in and started playing some of my reference tracks, I was like, man, bottom end of these is so solid, and it goes down so deep for the volume of the box and the size of the drivers. I mean, it really is an accomplishment, I think.
Yeah. And I feel like part of that is we're there's a lot of tech that goes into the drivers themselves so that they can have a lot of excursion, and it's just that tight transient response too that helps kind of give that feeling of solidity in the low end. Right.
Another technology that we want to talk about, since we're talking about speaker technology, is SPOC. Right. What is SPOC?
Okay, so again, that's it's sort of a little clever acronym. It's a spectrally optimized conversion, and so I'm trying to make more affordable speakers, but I feel like one of the things I have to do is I don't want to compromise, so I'm always trying to up my game. I think every opportunity to build a more affordable speaker and sort of scale down in one regard is an opportunity for me to be more clever. So I've got to get smarter and do more with the resources that I have available. So one of those was SPOC, and it's basically a new kind of conversion system where so in a typical analog to digital converter, this is a chip you have to buy. You can't make your own chips, unless you have $1 billion or something like that. So, you're limited to what you can actually buy. And these chips have relatively low voltage inputs, So for professional signal levels, you have to attenuate to get the signal into the converter. And that, that all is because of the low frequencies, right? Because, music is essentially like pink noise. It has high amplitudes in the low frequencies, low amplitudes in the high frequencies. And so you need to attenuate to squeeze those low frequencies down. But we're building speakers, right? And we need to split the highs and lows anyway, right? So I've got to put a crossover into this thing. So it just occurred to me, well, what if I take, I'm doing digital signal processing, but what if I take one of the stages of the filtering and stick it out in front of the converter? So basically, in the Footprint 03, we have this crossover. One stage of the crossover is splitting the mid and tweeter from the woofer. If I put that filter stage out in front of the converter, now I can send the low frequencies in. I still need to attenuate those to fit them inside the converter, but the high frequencies are lower amplitude, and I can send those into the converter unattenuated. So essentially full resolution. So I'm not losing any signal to noise. I'm not essentially throwing away bits. And then that can go all the way through, and then it comes back out through the DACs. And in the previous case, we would have to put gain, which again is just another opportunity for noise and distortion, to drive the amps. But again, the high frequencies can go through and no gain stage needed. Low frequencies do need the same kind of thing, but our ears are much more sensitive to noise, distortion and artifacts in the high frequencies than we are the low frequencies.
Right.
So so I've effectively gained bit resolution by doing this.
Right. Very cool.
And I can take a good converter, and I can make a great converter, and I can take a great converter, and I can make it into something that that outperforms pretty much anything. So.
Right. That's super cool. So I have to ask you, often we think of technology as trickling down from the high end to the low end, but it sounds like this is something you're developing more for the Footprint series. Do you see those kind of things trickling up?
Yeah, that's the kind of cool thing. I feel like it's coming from high end products and trying to make more affordable products. Like I said, it forces me to be more clever, because I don't want to compromise. I don't want to leave anything out.
Right.
And so it's just another opportunity to say, like, well, I'm gonna compromise as little as possible and try to up my game by when I make this cheaper speaker. And if I could figure out a way to make the $2,000 speaker sound like my $10,000 speaker, I would do that in a second. Right. I'm not that smart, but there are hopefully we can get there someday.
And of course, you've also got, again, looking at the cutaway of the box here, boy, the cabinet's thick.
Yeah.
It's also, even without the dual woofer in this particular case, it's still very inert, to use your word from earlier, even with the with the port and with a single driver.
Yeah, and there's even a lot of things going on there. So the cabinets are really well braced, and we actually do. For example, you can see that there's this brace here behind the woofer. The woofer is actually bumped up against that brace and presses against that brace and puts tension into the cabinet. So we're building tension into the cabinet, which what it does is essentially raises the resonant frequencies of the panels, and then that is easier to turn into heat rather than vibrations.
Right. So how many iterations do you go through? You have the idea for a Footprint 03. How many iterations do you go through, and when do you start listening versus when do you have the concept?
I've gotten to the point where I kind of know what the speaker's going to sound like before I ever build it.
Yeah.
So those iterations have gotten a lot shorter. It's really much more now about manufacturability and getting all the systems in place, and frankly for us, because we're a small company and kind of bootstrapping ourselves all the time, making it so that we can actually build these things.
Right.
In the numbers that we know that, look, when we come up with a sub $2,000 speaker of Barefoot that people can afford, that we can actually deliver them.
Right.
So we've been, for as long as Barefoot has existed, it seems like we've been in a perpetual state of back order. Right. And I'm been trying very hard to make that not the case anymore.
Yeah, right. Well, you've got the full range covered now. Everything from, as you said, sub 2,000 for the Footprint 03s up to the much more aspirational, we'll say, price points of some of the large systems with subwoofers and many drivers and things.
Yes,
and so you got the whole range covered.
Yeah.
So Footprint 04, Footprint 05, are we going to see the line continue?
I don't want to learn not to make any promises that I can keep in. But
so we just have to wait and see.
There's lots of stuff coming. So.
That's fantastic. Well, Thomas, thank you so much for sitting down with us today to talk about yourself and your company and these amazing monitors. As I said, I've just been so impressed with the Footprint series and, of course, the higher price monitors. I mean, just simply fantastic. So congratulations on all that.
Thanks.
And we're so happy to have you here at Sweetwater.
Yeah.
Come back and join us again. I hope that you enjoyed this installment of the Plugged In podcast by Sweetwater. Our thanks to Thomas Barefoot for sitting down with me for this interview. Thomas is bringing a unique approach to bear on studio monitor design, and the success of that approach is abundantly apparent when you have the chance to hear any of his monitors, including the very cool new Footprint 03 model. Now, you can learn more about the full range of studio monitors from Barefoot Sound by pointing your browser over to sweetwater.com, or better yet, reach out to your Sweetwater sales engineer for full information. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Mitch Gallagher, and this has been the Plugged In podcast by Sweetwater.